This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Safety FM with Jay Allen. I hope everything is good and grand inside of your neck of the woods as we are hanging out on this lovely day, no doubt about that. Anyway, so let's start getting into it because we got a doozy for you today. We're going to do a throwback to when we were hanging out at Energy Safety Canada's conference in Banff, Canada. So let's go through it on what we will be talking about today. Today, we are going to have the presentation done by Claus Rose. So take a listen to what it's about. It's about human data management is waste. Yeah, take a listen to this. The case study discusses GE's renewable energy journey in developing MATE, that's M-A-T-E, the award-winning machine learning and AI tool designed to store and validate environmental health and safety data. This tool, which has been a 92% accuracy rate, was developed in collaboration with multiple technology companies, and the goal was to validate their EHS data with a tool that required zero human interface. So sit back as we sit down and take a listen to the presentation by Claus Rose here on the Jay Allen Show, or should we call it Safety FM with Jay Allen? But at the very end, after the presentation, we're going to sit down with Mr. Rose and have a brief discussion about his presentation and what he sees going on. Anyways, let's take a listen right now on Safety FM with Jay Allen.
What if everything we thought we knew about safety was just interference? From the host of the Rated R Safety Show and the founder of Safety FM comes the complete signal transmission trilogy, now available in one powerful edition. Safety, in my opinion, the book that started the conversation. Safety Mutation, where the boundaries of culture, systems, and belief begin to break. And now, Safety Transmission, the final piece of the signal. For the first time, all three books are together in one volume. The Signal Transmission Trilogy, Complete Edition. This isn't just about compliance. It's about consciousness. It's about decoding the way we think, lead, and live, inside and outside the system. Whether you've been following the signal since the beginning or you're just now tuning in, this is the version to own. Search Signal Trilogy on Amazon or visit safetyfm.com to get your copy now.
But welcome back to the room. There's a big crowd for our next speaker, and I'd like to introduce him. Claus Rose. Claus is the managing director of Safe Steps 24, a quality environmental health and safety consulting company known for delivering state-of-the-art programs in culture transformation, digitalization, and health management. Claus brings a wealth of experience, having served as global EHS director for major companies like GE and Siemens, leading large-scale cultural change programs that have earned significant award-winning success. His leadership philosophy is deeply influenced by his time as an Army officer. So don't be surprised if he makes you get down and give him 20 push-ups. Today, Claus will be sharing a case study on GE Renewable Energy's journey in developing MATE. That is an award-winning machine learning and AI tool designed to store, validate EHS data with a remarkable 92% accuracy rate. Please welcome Claus Rose to the stage.
Everybody is quiet, waiting for the magic to happen. Before we get into that, I'm going to talk about a very important topic. As you can see, human data management is waste. I'm gonna bring you on a journey. Before we do that, I wonder, do we have 3 brave people in the audience who will be volunteering to come on stage? Don't be shy, come on. Yeah, come on. Yeah, come on. Hi, Georgina.
Hi, Klaus.
Hi, Trevor. Nice to see you. Hi, George. Nice to see you. So while I'm talking, you get a very simple task.
Okay.
Listen carefully. I only say it once. You need to come up with the most important job as a health and safety officer. It cannot be more than 10 words. And you have to find one that's going to be your speaker. Go. So while these are working a little bit in the background, I have a question for the audience. How many in this audience are currently undergoing a culture change management program? Hands in the air. Okay. How many in the audience have, in the last year, undergone a culture transformation program? Okay. Those that have undergone a culture change transformation program, how many of you have been successful? Hands in the air. Okay? See, that's pretty scary, right? And the interesting part, if you look at reports that were published in 2019, 21, 23, 24, by McKinsey, Forbes, just to mention two of the bigger ones, 70% of all organizations that do culture change fail. 70%. And guess what's even more scary? It's all for the same three reasons. One, you don't understand how to do culture change. Point number one. Point number two, we don't understand the inherent culture within an organization. So me being Danish, people from other countries, we have an inherent different culture. So one does not fit all, is the message in that. And then the last one, which is an interesting one, people have a philosophy that needs to be a tone from the top, and there are others that say there needs to be a tone from the front line. Guess what? You cannot do with just the one. There has to be something in the middle, and that message is very different. This is why in 2019, I made a promise I would find a way to do machine learning and AI that nobody else had done before. And that's it. So I'm going to go back to the team. Have you found spokesperson?
Yes, sir.
You?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I know there's a mic here.
So what we came up with was engage employees to identify risk and promote safe work.
Okay. Was that 10 words?
9.
Okay, good. So you passed the test, which is good. However, you're completely wrong.
We took a poll.
That's good. That's good. No. And here is the scary part. Health and safety professionals, they just have one job, and one job only. That's to get out of a job. Never ever forget that. Why is that important? If you don't, ask yourself how many times have your CFO or the financial organization come to you and ask you to cut costs? If that has happened, you have failed miserably. If you are being bypassed by the financial constraints, you're doing a good job. So keep that in mind, because in a financial term, all of us, including me, are just an overhead cost allocation. We provide zero value add to any business bottom line. So we have to earn the respect and the trust that it takes for an organization to bypass you from a financial perspective. So if you ever want to have a good metric, that should be the one you should be focused on. Every time you don't need to cut costs and the organization has, you're doing a good job. Thanks for playing along.
Thank you.
Thank you. Give him a round of applause. So when we talk about EHS software, what is the purpose of your EHS software solution? Anybody want to give a shout out? Any ideas? Yeah?
Produce metrics so you can show value.
Produce metrics, show value, okay. Others?
Lower administration costs.
Lower administration cost, yeah. Others?
The illusion of due diligence.
Illusion of due diligence, that's good, that's a good one. Anything else?
To make the safety management system easy to use for the boots on the ground.
Easy safety management system for the boots on the ground. Okay, so you see you have a variety of different approaches to what the system is able to do. If you want to move into machine learning and AI, you need to be crystal clear on what it is that you want to achieve. So, coming back to what I mentioned, I set myself out on a quest to do something that nobody else had done before. And remember, we are talking 2019, which is pretty long time ago. And the quest was, I wanted to create a solution together with a very talented team finding a machine learning using non-supervised learning. I'll get back to what that is. And as little human bias as possible to validate our current performance within the environment, health, and safety space. That was the task. With MADE, it took us until mid of 2020, then we have created the tool. We started operationalizing it in 2021 for that year. And for that, we won 2 awards for the tool for being the most promising upcoming project in that space and for the best cooperation with an external partner. That was our problem. And I want you to kind of go through that very diligently. Because at the end of the day, what we wanted to do was we wanted to improve worker safety. And we wanted to make sure that it was really actionable for the leaders, not for the EHS people, but for the leaders to understand what they needed to do in order to put the right measures in place to bring down the number of events. We weren't focused on our total recordable or the number of other metrics that we have. We wanted to try and make it very simple. The problem that we had about 365,000 records, and we have roughly about 1,200 coming in every week. And we had a business that was growing year over year with roughly about 15%. So huge growth for a renewable company of roughly about 50,000 employees. So massive undertaking. And then we said, okay, how can we actually make that experience less labor intensive? Because we've tried to do what everybody wants to do, putting humans in front of a ton of data and then ask them to figure out what is the reality. Guess what? We can't. It's impossible. Humans don't have that capacity. It's that simple. So what we wanted to do was to set up some criteria that the system had to be able to do. One, it needed to actually show our operational leaders where they needed to go and focus. So really boil it down to exactly where in an operational aspect that they needed to focus. I'll get into an example to show that to you. Then quickly be able to then take the model and then apply it elsewhere, because we had other parts of the business that we wanted to kind of implement this solution. And then it had to, what we call in the machine learning, it has to have a tell-us classification. So tell us what you learn, not what we think we need to learn, but what the machine is learning. And that's really scary, because then you had to let go. And the last piece, it needed to be able to predict future. So literally, if I decide to do nothing, what's my future going to look like? And that was back in 2020, 20. The good thing, if you want to do something like that, then the question that I often get asked, how much data do I need in order to get something that is pretty reliable? I would say 30,000 records, then you're good to go. It isn't more than that. The way that the system is calculating its own accuracy is simply based on a built-in calculator from a mathematical standpoint. So any machine learning tool has that inbuilt capability. So what we decided to do was ask ourselves some questions. So incident classification, we all know that. So we have created categories. It could be lifting operation, it could be manual handling, whatever we want to call them. But what we said, okay, we needed to find the hybrid framework that the system is going to figure out. So we didn't tell the system what it needed to go look for. It created its own set of incident classifications. And it also, with a little bit of help, we're able to then classify whether that was a significant or a minor event. And then finally, if there are any trends. So literally kind of set up a heat map of risks. So that was where we wanted to go. Then the correlation part is an important aspect to understand when you talk about machine learning and AI. Correlation is where the system is 1,000th time clever than any of us here in this room together. Because the system is very quickly able to then look for what you call similarities or correlations. So if I have an event, it is automatically looking through drop-down menus, the free text, to see if there's anything that kind of has a secondary activity. That could be, if I'm lifting an object, our brain would automatically say, I'm not able to take a load from A to B, so I'm going to focus on that. But if you look at a lifting operation in the context, there is, if you take a mobile crane, there is, vehicle operation until you get to your pre-mobilization location. Then you set up the crane. Then you walk the crane to the crane pad. Then you do the lifting, or you do all of the preparation. Then you do the lift. And then you do the same scenario backwards. And the system actually looks for that. And then the important part here is really looking at, we have multiple events that are happening. And now the important part is to figure out exactly how to then look at those and how to do the deep dive on those. And that was what we did with the correlation. I'll show you the tool, and then you'll get a very good idea of what that means. The deep dive segmentation is really very simple. If we just keep with the lifting operation. If we looked at lifting operations, then we go into correlation and figure out vehicle operation is where we have issues. Okay? Then we dig into vehicle operations and figure out, hey, it's actually exactly at the pre-mobilization site where we have all of the vehicle events that are happening. So my attention is then automatically driven from lifting through vehicle operations to the pre-installation crane pad. So now I all of a sudden get very laser focused on where I need to go and then put my effort from a human being on what I need to go and look for. The system overview that we had, and you can have others, but the important part is when you work with machine learning and AI and you use non-supervised learning, any data set is giving you some form of insight. In our case, we had benchmark GenSuite. We had CompliWorks for our contracting partners, and then we had an audit database. Did they look the same? Did they have the same setup? No. Does it matter? No. Were there different languages? Yeah, absolutely. Anything from English over to Chinese. Is the system having problems with that? Absolutely not. It's just putting in a very simple translation model, and then it will translate it into the common language, which was English. And for that, you then put in the machine learning interface. And the machine learning is just a box. So MATE is just a box that was asked to take that data and analyze it from those 3 locations. But that could be 5, there could be 10 locations, it doesn't matter. And then the output that we then gave our operational leaders were, in the first phase, Tableau. Tableau is kind of, it's a dead end because it's just showing you data, but you can have no interface, so we cannot talk to the machine. We went over to Power BI and thought that was really the next evolution. Guess what? It isn't. It's still a dead end. And then we went over to another company that had developed a platform called Nucleus, and Nucleus had a very strong capability of us being able to ask questions. So any operational leaders could ask a question to the system, and it will provide an answer based on the analysis that it did inside of the system. I'll show an example of what that looks like. That's very simple what it does. So when we talk about machine learning, and when I talk about non-supervised learning. Non-supervised learning is scary. Imagine you're being put in a car and asked to get from A to B, but just to make it a little bit more spicy, you get blindfolded. And then you get asked to go on. That's scary. That's kind of like what it's like when you work with non-supervised learning. You can also do the easier part, which a lot of companies are able to do. It's called supervised learning. So you tell the system what it needs to look for. The problem with that is if you ask it to look for A, it will find A. But it will not have the ability to find A plus 1 or A minus 1. So you're actually losing a lot of opportunities to then specifically look for certain part of the data sets. So when you do topic modeling in the machine learning, you have a lot of words that come up. Those words are being clustered. The system is clustering those. You don't do that as a human. Then, based on that, it creates its own classifications. Those classifications may not be what you are used to be using. Guess what? So what? It really doesn't matter because it's analyzing your data. And then it looks at anything that is non-text data, and then it's creating the classification models. Those classification models, when you do this, you have no idea what that's going to look like. So in our case, this is what happened. We got 21 top categories. We got 254 subcategories, correlations. We didn't invent those, the system invented those. And that was for 9 profit and loss centers in less than 2 minutes. So round about 380,000 records in less than 2 minutes in that structure. This is what the system was able to do. And that is pretty damn amazing. And here is now the tricky part. Now I'll go back to the CFO that I talked about earlier, that say, yeah, we need humans. In a financial world, humans need to validate that our data is accurate and we can provide that to our board and our shareholders. So I don't trust that system because it's only at that point in time, it was at 82% accuracy rate. It's not 100%. Say, okay, fine, let's test it. We agreed on a number that was 2,000 records. 2,000 records. In his words, that wasn't a lot. And I said, trust me, it's going to be a lot to swallow. 2 individuals appointed. They spent 2 weeks and gave up because they needed to do exactly the same. Top level classification, correlations, and then try to come up with a logical overview. And by the way, the system did it in less than 30 seconds. After that, he told me, I know why you're doing this. Peace, and I will support the project going forward. This is the system, and now I need a little bit of help from the people in the background. So I will very quickly show you the level of data that you can actually see. So if I go to the first one, which is the primary level classification, now he's going to start a little bit of a video so they kind of get a reflection. So this is a heat map. The numbers that you see in that heat map is actual reports that has been bucketized. And then you can see there is what's called a severity and there is a frequency. So the frequency is where it looks at how often do we do certain operations, and then it classifies that automatically. And from a severity perspective, this is where we as humans need to help the machine understand that if you have a fatality, that is more significant than if you have a concern report. So we had to help that, and that's where you come in and act. And the most important part, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, you can see miscellaneous. This is important. You can see it says 22.3%. 22.3% is the data that the system is discarding as not being feasible to add to a category. So I know from the start I'm not blindsided. But it could be a one-off, it could be a mixture of inputs that kind of does not match. So the system is telling you up front, don't worry, it's not important. But it still has a 92% accuracy rate. If we go to the correlation, so if I had, let's say, lifting operation, I could go into, now it's working surfaces, then I can pick and then say, I want to understand the working at height aspect because that is apparently what is happening. And then the system can pick the year, you can pick the profit and loss center, you can pick the site, and then you can dig into exactly where you need to go and focus. And once you do that, you get a very different understanding of where your real problems are. And then you can say, where do I want to put my focus? Well, very simply, we told our operational leaders they need to figure out how to then use their time and effort on their top risks. And we gave them one rule and one rule only. The only way to get rid of the risk was either eliminate, substitute, isolate, or engineering control. That was the only thing that would matter if they wanted to see a change in that slide. And if you go to the deep dive section, this is where it then gets even further detailed on exactly what part of the operation that you need to go and look for. So it's really being clustered into a significant portion. So all of a sudden, you kind of get to the point where you learn exactly what it is that drives you to make changes. And here, you can, for the first time, see that inputs matters. Whether the reports are not fully to the standard that you want, but what happens here in an organization when you do this and make it very visible to everybody is that all of a sudden you'll have the blue-collar workers come to you and say, hey, this is really great. Now, for the first time, we actually see that you are doing something with the data that we provide you, and we can see that things are changing. So what happens is that if you look at that heat map, if the operational leaders were doing the right thing, their risk profile just completely changed. Guess what happened in the organization? Any ideas? Any ideas on what happened in the organization or from an operational leader perspective?
Significant culture change?
In what sense?
Towards safety and reporting, accurate reporting.
Correct. But if you look at it from an operational leader perspective, they started competing against each other. Hey, I only have 5 risks, you have 15. Ha 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 ha. And then all of a sudden it became a sport on how to actually get to the point where you then have, something to show for. So guess what? Nobody cared about the total recordable injury rate or the lost time frequency rate. That was irrelevant. All of a sudden, this was their reality. They had a system that they could actually see what was happening in their area, and then they could do, competition with the next door neighbor. That made a significant change. The predictive analytics that we then did in May 2.0, where we actually got into the generative analytics, was really, we were trying different things. We wanted to measure impact, and we wanted to kind of look at a safety score. That's typical EHS. We need to find something that we can measure. But in essence, it really doesn't matter. So what we end up doing instead was really this simple. I'm going to show you a real case here where we had an onshore wind business. They had a problem. So we asked MAID, what are the risks that are trending over the last 6 months? 2 seconds later, you have 3 categories, 65% of your risks. And there you can see that the uses of high torque tools. High torque tools, hopefully most of you know that. That's very heavy equipment they use to do for bolt, torque, and tensioning. And when we talk about wind turbines, they are pretty big, some of the bolts, in order to keep the tower in place. So, okay, we go on. So how many of the incidents are related to the high torque uses in 2021? The system is going to tell you had 19 recordable events, 36 minors, 28 potential severe events, and 184 near misses. Okay, remember what I said earlier. We had one rule, hierarchy control. Eliminate means that I completely take it out of the equation, so we told the system that. If I do substitution, we gave it a different rating. If you put in isolation, another rating. Anything other than that wouldn't change that projection. So show me the projection for the injury. So now I'm going into the future, doing nothing. Then here's what you get. Funny enough, it now takes the growth of the business into the equation as well. And then it says, you're going to have this number. And then we said, okay, show me the prediction if I use either the eliminate or substitution controls. Now the system knows, because this is just a simple mathematical calculation, and it tells you a different story. Guess what you now have? Exactly. You have a business case. If you go to any operational manager and say, here is your future, it's going to look like this or like this. Where do you want to go? Nobody is going to say, I'm going to go with that one, because that doesn't look right. So in onshore wind, they decided to do a deep dive analysis on the high torque tools and figured out that they had 21 different tool sets. Out of those, 10 had no overload function. So if you don't have an overload function, what it means is you can torque until the tool explodes. Guess where that came from? It came from our beloved people in procurement that had figured out that by buying tools without that, they'd saved around $100 to $150. So that's what they did, which is stupid. That's the most critical safety feature that you have on a high torque tool. The second part was, out of the 21, 18 of those were 2-man operated. Imagine I'm the one holding the torque tool, and I need to go to a bolt, and then 20 feet below me is the guy that is operating the pump. And then I'm kind of hoping, yeah, I'm ready, go ahead, and hoping for the best. He has no idea of what I'm doing, and I'm just hoping for the best. And that's just, again, stupid. So what they end up doing was very simple. They said, we will just keep the 3 systems that are one-man operated. They all have overload functions. And after that, this is what they had. 0 events. 0 potential severe events. And more importantly, people that tell you every time you do eliminate or substitute it's going to cost you money, bullshit. This actually saved the business a ton of money. A ton of money by simply understanding your data. And this is what happened. In 1 year in the organization by doing this, we took 85% of all our severe injuries and fatalities out of the equation. I don't care about the 85%. What I care about is the number 24-4. And what was more important is that we took almost 100 recordable events out of the equation. And the more interesting part of that is the people that were injured actually spent less days away from work, 7 days on average. If you do the mathematical calculation from a financial perspective, this tool had paid itself by a factor of 10. And again, the other interesting part that happened was, guess what became a sport for all of our operational leaders? And you can see that. They start going to where their work was being done because now they were intrigued by the fact that they could actually see that doing this actually made the right thing out on site. So they started to focus on doing risk management in the right way. And that's the only way. And since then, that organization do not talk about metrics at all. They talk about risk management. They still have a metric because the managing board wants that and our regulators want that, but we'll have to teach them at a certain point in time that they may want to start looking at something else. Sorry for those that are in the room, but like Jordina, I like to kind of push people a little bit over the edge here. So I think that's important. And more importantly, the number of times that people actually raised their hand and stopped work was also significantly going up. So all of a sudden, just putting simple things in place made a significant difference from an organization in a very short period of time. Was it difficult? No, it wasn't. It was actually extremely easy to do. You just have to believe that it's possible. And here is where I always tell people, don't forget who invented machine learning and AI. Humans did. So humans always have the ability to drive inventions to the next level. This is only possible if you learn one very important sentence: fail to learn, learn to fail. Never give up. So with that, take questions.
I think we already have a couple in Slido. We've got more than a couple. Good job. A lot of people interested. Do you have recommendations about how companies can do this using licensed chat GPT tools or Copilot, which is most commonly licensed?
Yep.
How do you train the system?
The problem that you have is if you use open source technologies is really simple. You get out of a controlled environment. So I'm not a huge fan of that. If you kind of build a system based on open source and then have it in a controlled environment, you also control the data that is put in. So I'm not saying you cannot use it, you just need to understand the pitfalls that are involved. I'm not a fan of it, but you have to use open source model and then just put them in a controlled environment. That, for me, is the right way to do it, and then you also get the results at a higher level.
All right. The next one is, we've talked about how minor incidents are not predictive of major incidents. How does the AI make a predictive leap on serious events, and is this a limitation?
It's not, because I already mentioned, if humans want to kind of understand the same logic that a machine can, you're fooling yourselves. It may not be 100% accurate, but it's often a lot better than what you can come up with yourself. So I would say the limitation is always ask questions. And the most important part is you're never blindsided. In our case, behind all of the numbers, you can just right-click, and then you can download the data if you want to look so what is it that's really behind the data that I'm looking at? So you still have to do due diligence. It's not going to be without that. I would never recommend that, but it's a heck of a lot easier to do it like that.
All right, this next question is really quite good because we have all sorts of people from all sort of different sized industries. It looks like a project scaled to a huge company with lots of software support and a ton of data. How would you meaningfully apply AI for smaller companies?
It's really non-different. I think what I would highlight again, so what kind of data points would you need? You need about 30,000 records, and that could be data that stems from 10 years back. It could be in Excel, it could be in a system that you built, it could be an external system, it doesn't matter. I think you need to be open to it. And then you also need to realize the more data you have, the quicker the system learns. For a smaller company, that could actually be a spark where you actually then produce more insights to your business. So it could actually be a very positive way of actually getting more reporting and better reporting in smaller companies. So I don't see any need for that. And for this project, by the way, just to highlight that, we had zero help from the IT department, zero. We did it ourselves. I had one guy that worked with an external company, and it took 6 weeks to do it. So you don't need a ton of, and not just because you're big, even a small company can do this.
And whenever I need to call my tech support, they just say, shut it off and turn it back on again. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. We hear the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. How do you improve the quality of reported data so you can more accurately assess trends?
And here is where I think people need to kind of get their mindset a little bit different. Because I think I mentioned it, data, regardless whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, is still a learning opportunity for a machine learning tool. And that's the important part, because it will still, if it cannot make sense of it, it'll just discard it. Does it matter? No. What happens is that once you start putting it in place, people start to be more careful with the data that they actually are providing us. So the level of quality of the reporting actually increased quite significantly, and even the number of reports also increased quite dramatically. So going from 1,200, we ended up with more than 2,000. At certain peak points in a week's basis. So it's actually driving that. I think the only thing that is a limiting factor if you have only headlines. So if your data is only headlines, then absolutely you're not going to get anything valuable out of that at all. But if you have certain free text involvement and it has some form of systematic, you can still get some sensible learning out of that.
All right. What are you finding AI is limited to with this type of analysis? What do safety professionals and other leaders still bring to the table? Is it replacing us?
I think in essence, I already talked about it in the start. All of us have one job, that's to get out of a job. And it's really that simple. Because what happened here is that the operational side of the house is actually taking the responsibility that they have to take seriously, and they are going to do it. So our job is really to help them through that process, and then we get pulled in if they have real questions, and then we get back to the point, now we are creating value. Is it a limiting factor? No. It's actually an enrichment for any organization, because guess what happened? The first time that we opened up MAID, I was probably the one that got the first aha moment and say, now I understand why nothing is changing. We are just focusing in all of the wrong areas. So That aha moment was important for us, and I think that's really what's driving it. So if there's any limitations, it's the limitations that you don't know what you don't know.
How does this model deal with AI hallucinations?
Well, it's very simple. If it's in a controlled environment, hallucinations does not happen. It's really that simple. And that's why I say you use open source, but you put them into your controlled environment, then you don't have that. It doesn't exist.
All right. Does the system create recommendations for equipment substitution or elimination, or does that have to be inputted by humans?
That is our job. So we have to come up with exactly what then we put in place. So the machine can't do that. The machine can provide you suggestions for what you should be looking for. So the system is actually providing. So I'll give a very simple example. If you have a number of vehicle operations where people are bouncing into different kind of stuff, the system goes through all of the stuff that has been in your accidents report, and then it will look and then say one of the things that come up very frequently, we have to train our employees. Okay? Then the system is going to give you have to train your employees. That's not what I want, but then we have to understand this is where the machine is at right now. So the better we are at then putting the right measures in over time, the system is actually going to be able to give you better recommendations for what you could do. But at the end of the day, it's still us as humans that have to be 100% sure that this is going to do the trick. So the system is not replacing us 100% in that sense.
All right. A lot of AI tools promise transformation, but few deliver culture change. What makes MATE 2.0 different?
Well, just looking at the results, I think in essence, if you in that short space of time can take that many serious injuries and fatalities out of the equation, I think that's your answer. And more importantly, it became the only thing that people from an operational perspective was looking at as their metric. So they got really high on making sure that they can see that things were changing in real life.
How do you measure accuracy in unsupervised learning models?
So I mentioned it briefly. The system has a built-in way of calculating its own accuracy. So it's not done by humans, it's done by the machine. We tested that to see whether we could come up with a better answer, and the truth is we couldn't. So the system and any machine learning system has a built-in verification of its own accuracy.
Do you think you can truly eliminate bias in AI? It seems logical that the AI system will contain the bias of the programmer and the knowledge it is provided.
You can't. It's going to be impossible because if I gave an example early on, if I take the hierarchy control, if I eliminate a risk, my bias tell me that would mean that the risk doesn't exist. Do I know that for certain? Pretty much. But do I have 100% guarantee? I wouldn't put my life on it. The second part, if I need to tell that if I substitute a risk, that I would rate that as a risk of 20%. That's human bias. If somebody wants to say it's at 15, or somebody wants to say it's at 10, does that make it more or less accurate? I don't know, but that's human bias. And you cannot completely remove that.
Can you expand on what was done with the data that was flagged miscellaneous by the machine? How was that data classified, validated? Was it excluded?
It was excluded, 100% excluded, simply because when we started looking at it, we found that either the data was a compromise between different classification that made it pretty much impossible to work with it, or the data simply had too little context for us to make any sense of it. So we very quickly realized that you have to be very laser focused on where you go and focus, and spending a lot of time and effort to figure out exactly what was behind that just didn't add up. So we very quickly came to the conclusion we just don't want to look at it. What we want to look at is, can we make sure that that data set is diminishing in size? Because what that would mean is that our input is getting more accurate and the quality is improving. So, and this was naturally what happened. The number of miscellaneous in percentage that was put over has become less and less.
All right. How much does the program cost, and is there a coupon code for attendees at the Energy Safety Conference?
It's not that expensive. I think in essence, of course it depends on the size of the company, how many tools you want to have, but a ballpark figure, if you have around $50,000, you can figure out whether it's going to be viable for your business. And if you want to have it fully implemented, it could be between 150 to 250, round and about. So it is not really that expensive.
All right, let's flip down to the one. What's the typical time to integrate it into a company?
Typical, it's between 3 to 6 months.
Okay. You mentioned regulators moving away from injury PSIs and SI reporting. What would you like to see them move towards?
Our level of managing risks, high risks. So how good are we at that? And can we show that? Because at the end of the day, if we can control our high risks and we can control what we see, the likelihood of having less fatalities is going to be prominent. And I think that's the right thing to go and look for, instead of just looking at data that makes zero sense.
Crappy data in, crappy data out. Would you agree?
Nope.
Nope?
Nope, I wouldn't. So any data point is a learning point. You just have to trust the system, and that's tough. Because it's in a controlled environment. If I go to ChatGPT, I would say different story, because if enough people say that the moon is green, at a certain point in time, if the number of people that have said the moon is green, then at a certain point in time, that's going to be the reality inside of ChatGPT. That's not the case for us, unless people are deliberately from the front line putting crap data in just to make fun of the EHS people, but we haven't seen that. So otherwise, I'm pretty sure that that's not going to happen.
All right. How does your model deal with unrealistic solutions? For example, substituting one tool for another, but giving up on substantial productivity?
Well, it doesn't, because the solutions at the end of the day is done by the people. It's still a business decision. Let's not fool ourselves. We are in businesses to make money, but we want to make sure that we help an organization as best as we can.
Okay. I built a PVA for the organization that sits on top of our IMS data. What should I focus on to maximize its value?
That's difficult because I don't understand the system. So if it's something that the individual who wrote it wants to talk more about in detail, he or she is happy to come out afterwards and we can have a conversation.
Can we have a break before the next session? That's a question to me. I'll take that. And no, you can't. No, you can't. We're gonna go right into the next one after this, and then we're gonna have a much longer break after that. So there you go. Thanks for that question. Appreciate it. Looks like it can predict. Can it prescribe? For example, can it tell you what to do?
Well, it can't. It's giving you recommendations. And that's how you have to look at it. It's not going to tell you what to do. You have to make the conscious choice of what you want to do.
Okay. Can you integrate it into EHS Insight or other platforms?
Again, I don't know, Mike, so I don't know EHS Insights, but platforms, that's not a problem. It depends on how you want to set it up. So the answer probably to that is it can, but happy to have a conversation afterwards.
All right. You said AI doesn't hallucinate in a controlled environment. Does that mean it only uses trusted data in a narrow focus, or is there more to it? And I know there was another question about what is an AI hallucination. So can you describe what that is, and then can you answer the question?
So the AI hallucination is very simple. It's trying to build a reality that may or may not exist. So, and that's typically done when you have data that is, I would say, distinct from one side to the other, and then it's trying to build its own reality. This is in a narrow controlled environment, so it means that you literally control the data yourself. So we don't go externally to get a bunch of data. You can, but in the case of MAID, it was in a controlled environment.
This one has been this one has been upvoted, so I'm going to ask the question. I don't know if Klaus knows the answer, but I bet we all do. Would the AI identify the hazard of serving beans for lunch and then having everyone in the same boardroom for the next hour? That's what Tums are for.
I don't know, but maybe it could. I don't know.
Let's go with somebody just questioned Skynet, question mark.
No.
No.
No, not at all. So don't be afraid that once you implement it, it's going to be your next Skynet. It's not.
All right. I'm interested in how to develop this to get scheduled. For example, weekly outputs about what we're seeing with our leading and lagging indicators. Any tips?
Well, once you build it, you get it on a daily basis. So the system just gets updated every 24 hours. The inputs gets in, and then you have your new reality. You can draw your indicators straight out. Mm-hmm. It's just, this is what you can use Power BI, Tableau, and others. You can do exactly that. You can just ask the system to give you exactly those metrics. But all of the data inputs are done automatically from the system.
Right, topic modeling will only give you a combination of words. How did you label the topics?
So when you work with machine learning, if you take lifting operation as an example, the system will tell you that lifting operation is often related to loads, lifts, tools, slings, cranes, vehicle operations, manual handling, working at height. So all of those get clusters into what the machine figures out. So it's then our job as professionals in that space to say, what is the commonality for that grouping of words? And then you come up with the level classification or the topic model classification as you see it. But the underlying classification in the system stays intact. That doesn't change. So again, this is a little bit human bias, but you then have to make your decision on the topic labelings once the system have given you the topics that you have.
How do you validate your results?
Well, if it's in terms of the system does it. The results that we looked at was just a number of events that we didn't have. So real people not being injured, that was the thing that we looked at as our primary result count.
Have you heard of this use in cases in the medical field?
I have. I don't know enough about it, but I know that there are actually hospitals and others that are using similar setup.
All right. How does this look commercially? Are you selling the software, analyzing data on customers' behalf? How would we proceed contractually if interested? So
commercially, it's very simple. I go in and help.
Okay.
I have a non-biased approach, so I'm not bound to any specific tool. I pick partners to come and help, and then we just work with any company that wants to do this, and then figure out exactly what they want and how it should look, and then we build the tool based on that. Once we're done, we hand over the IP to them, and they own it. We don't have any monthly subscription fees and stuff like that. That's not the way that we work. So we literally build it. Once they have accepted it, they own it, and then they run it, and it's on their platform.
All right. You said you can pull the data from multiple sources. How do you manage the different sources so they are clean enough?
Well, again, the systems that you control are in essence clean. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. If you want to pull in, I would say, weather data and stuff, then you get data that you may not yourself be fully in control of. But that's always conversations that you need to have with the businesses that you work with in order to figure out exactly what they want to have as outside input into the systems. But, weather could be one example of where you don't have full control of the data.
Millions of dollars have been spent on safety systems worldwide, yet people are still getting hurt. What are we missing, and could this program help?
Well, absolutely. I think in essence, what we realized was we are not focusing on the right thing. So by simply focusing on the right thing, we made a significant change in a very short period of time. Is that the holy grail? No, it's not. People are still important, but what the system helped us do was focus. Be laser focused on where we need to go and then fix stuff. And there was no excuses. And I think this is really what is missing. Anybody that's working with this space have to understand that so much has changed. And if you look at it from a pure, 30,000 feet flying height, I'm a little bit of, ashamed that we haven't been able to get better performance in our organizations, because the evolution in technology, in equipment, in safety equipment has just changed. But have we significantly changed our statistical output as an organization if we look at where we are today? And the answer to that is, by a long shot, not. So the people that tell you that, yeah, but we have made, a 10% increase or decrease in incidents, I'll say, yeah, shame on you. You should have had a 60 or 70% decrease depending on the evolution of time. And that is where I think we need to understand the underlying issue, and that is really one of them.
What exactly is MATE 2.0 doing under the hood? Is it simply analyzing safety data, or is it actually shaping how leaders respond?
Well, it's only analyzing data, and it's analyzing data for two aspects: providing you insights and providing you, help. So literally you can ask questions and you can get a response. So this is what MATE is doing.
And you already answered the question about how long it takes to get implemented. How would you compare this? All right, this is our final question. Have any data outliers been addressed in your analysis, and is the system audited for authenticity and accuracy?
Well, have there been outliers? Absolutely. Is there going to be outliers in any system that you build? Absolutely. But you just have to go in and then do the validation checks once in a while. And I mentioned there are some parameters. The number of data that are being excluded as one. And the other part is, do you actually see the difference in your data sets, the people that are being injured or hurt? If that is the case, then I think you have a pretty good idea that the system is actually pretty accurate when it comes to that.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Klaus.
Welcome.
Appreciate it.
So, of course, I have to start off with a couple of questions. Number one, the first thing, have you been to Banff before?
No.
So what are you thinking so far? Do you like it? I mean, it's so picturesque that I don't even know how to describe it to people. So I always go, can you tell people what you think about being in this place?
Yeah, it's majestic. I talked to one of the people living in Calgary, and the thing that really amazes me is if you look into the Rockies and then see you have snow on the mountaintops. And just reflecting that, about 3 weeks ago, I was in the Alps, and there was zero snow, even though that from a height perspective, we're literally at the same altitude. So it's just unreal. And then I kind of reflect on how many years ago was it that I actually saw snow to that level in any part of the world. I can't remember. And I think that's really what sits with me, and that's just unbelievable.
No, it's pretty majestic being out here, and I always just like to start off with there. But you just directly came off the stage. There was a couple of references right at the beginning. So How did you go from GE and Siemens to come into this? How did you say, okay, this is the next segment I want to go into?
Very simple. It was circumstances. So the role that I had with GE was helping them become a standalone company. And out of that came two options. Either I move to the US to work for them, or I move outside and then figure out to do something else. And we didn't want to move back to the US. So we decided that, hey, going to go a different way. So I looked at it and say, with all of the knowledge that I've gained over the years and the real impact that we saw with using MATE, I said to myself, I need to be able to bring that to others, because this is so good. That would be, I would not do my duty as an individual that spent more than 20 years in the energy industry if I didn't want to help others, get the same amount of success. So this is really one of the key drivers for me.
But you're definitely taking a different approach from what other AI companies are doing or that sell AI or stuff in regards of you're not doing it as a license. You're doing it as, here, this is yours.
Yes.
And you're moving forward. So it's a different approach. So if somebody has technical issues with the program after it's sold to them, how do they go about?
They just come back to us, and it's very simple. Depending on how much time we need to spend with them, it's just where we go in and then they get a bill based on that.
Okay.
But the philosophy is you develop it together with them. It's their tool. And if you just have a licensed model, what happens is that it's often felt like a burden.
Okay.
In our case, once we have done the final acceptance test and they're happy with it, then they own the IP because one doesn't fit all. And I think this is where most companies that want to go in that space fail because they believe that one does fit all. In our case, it absolutely does not. So if I go into an organization, I'll not be able to tell them what their system is going to look like. It may look very different because they have a very different approach to how they want to solve their issue. And they may want to see something completely different. And again, one of the things that I've learned with working with the development and Mate is anything is possible. You just have to stay on it and be very clear on what are the objectives that you want to have solved. Don't ever give in to that. And that's why we always, when we work with organizations, the first thing we do is help them build the reality of what it is that they want to have. Once that's done, we agree, we sign it and say, yep. And every time people kind of wander off, we always say, hey, pull them back. Here's what we agreed. This is what you told us. Let's stay with that. And I think this is how you can, a lot quicker, put something like this into an organization.
So when you give them the design map that this is essentially what they're looking at the scope of work, this is what they want to accomplish, and then you turn around and say, okay, we need 30,000 data points.
Yeah.
Is there an initial shock when they hear that number of how many data points have to start off with?
I think not the number,
Okay.
but more or less, holy crap, where am I going to find that? And then they will come around and say, we have old stuff that is in Excel spreadsheets. We may have a system that we used 10 years ago, but we still have legacy data. But any data point is valid. So I think it's more the fact that where do I get the data from? And then the simple reason behind that is you want to create a certain amount of accuracy in the system. So when you talk about machine learning, if you start from scratch, if you have the inbuilt machine learning calculator that comes at around 30%, you have a very, very good system. When we did the beta version on ours, we were at close to 80%, which is a factor of 3 where you normally, or a factor of 2.5 where you normally would be. So that's why we want to have that amount of data. So we want to make sure that people get some form of success, because otherwise you're not able to scale it.
So the information, and this is going to be nerd talk here for a moment, the agents that are working behind, meaning the actual agents that are doing the portion of the machine learning, because you're not going into an external source and you're staying internally. How do the agents get into the system? I guess is essentially what I'm trying to get to.
It's very simple. So we use open source technology, but we do it in a controlled environment. So literally we have built, with the partners that I have, we built a system that can very quickly be adapted. So the coding for all eventualities of the machine learning topics that you're going to be covering, I think we pretty much cover them all. That's why we are very fast in getting those in. So that's probably the best way of describing it. And that's also why, for us, our intellectual property is in that capability. It is really not in the system that we are building, because it's just building blocks out of our system, literally speaking.
Okay. And then, of course, I have to ask the weird question because it's going to be even a weird question for me. You referenced legacy data in regards that the person can have all the data points regardless of what portion. So let's just say hypothetically, when I first started my company, I was behavior-based safety. And then all of a sudden, I started looking at things through the HOP lens, and we did some lean stuff. Because the information's kind of, we'll say, be a little bit all over the place. How would the system adjust to know the difference in regards, well, this is not how we see the world now, and things have changed. Can it do that information where it can tell the difference?
Well, when you look at it from a machine learning perspective, it's really black and white.
Right.
It looks at the data points, and then it looks at commonalities. And this is how it built its truth. So the system couldn't care less of whether you use lean, whether you used HOP. It just looks at the data.
And I only said lean because you used to work at GE. That's
but you're absolutely right. But it really doesn't matter, and that's why it only matters if you want to do supervised learning. Then you're going to get into a heap of trouble, because then you have to be able to distinguish the data. Otherwise, you're going to not get apples to apple. You're going to get apples to bananas.
Okay.
And that's going to be problematic, and that's even a lot more difficult. But then you're going to be excluding a lot of valuable data that you could have used for your own purposes. And that is why it's really that simple. You just need data. And then the language learning model that you put in to help analyze the data is the one that is creating your reality. And you may not like the outcome of that. Yeah, that's the whole point. Because you don't know what you don't know. And that, I think, is what differs us from a lot of others, that we say, yeah, well, we don't know either. So we don't know what we're going to learn. So for us, it's an interesting journey every time.
So when somebody comes in, you said the implementation process can be roughly about 3 months, probably a little bit longer, just depending. How long do you stay with them before they, on average, of course, with the different organizations, and say, okay, we're comfortable now enough to go out on our own?
So we literally stay with them for that process.
Okay.
So does that mean every day in and out? No, it does not. But what we always say to an organization, if you want to do this, we require that you have people that are dedicated within. Because if you don't, this is going to fail. So if you believe that just giving me a call and say, hey, come and fix it for us, guess what? I'm going to say, no, it's not going to happen. If you call me and say, hey, we want to do this, and we have a dedicated resource within IT, within EHS, that can help understand what it's like, and they're going to be there for the entirety of the time that it takes. And in that, once you kind of set the parameters, our team that is doing all of the coding for the machine learning tool, they're going to be working on their own. And once they have reached certain milestones, they're going to again come back to the company. But literally, once we interact with a company, we stay until we have the final acceptance test. Once that's done, then we're out. And then they call upon us if they need help or if they want to have expansions. So it's a learning process for them as well. And as for GE, it was very quickly moving from Mate 1.0 to Mate 2.0. And then we needed to come back, work with the same partners again, and then figure out how to do that.
So when you reference right there where you say expansion, are you talking about because there's a different model in regards of, so going from like Mate 1.0 to 2.0, is that would be portion of the expansion, or are they looking for more access into the system, or what do you exactly
No.
Right
so if we take Mate 1.0, so I think the output data that we have was very static.
Okay.
So I just had data. Mate 2.0 was an interaction. So I was able to ask questions. And then I would get an answer. I was able to predict future. I couldn't do that with Mate 1.0. So all of a sudden, I got different parameters inside of the tool that gave me different feasibilities that I didn't have before. So, and that could be some of the, next step interactions that you have with a company. And maybe you come up with something that, nobody has thought about. So it's always a challenge when you work with companies to figure out exactly what it should look like. And more importantly, having the conversation with them on what is possible and then get some of their own bias out of the system, which often takes longer
than the implementation process.
The implementation process, yeah.
Well, and if people want to know more about what you have going on, where can they find out more information?
Well, they can go to SafeSteps24, the website. They can contact me. And then always happy to have a conversation with anybody that wants to learn more. Happy to give people advice on what to do because, again, I'm not married to any system. I'm married to certain partners because I know they're able to deliver in a short period of time. So that's kind of the only thing that we do. And then also look at feasibility. So I think that's the most important part. Is it actually something that would make sense for a business to do this right now? And then, of course, data becomes the key issue. Do they have enough data that it will actually make a significant difference? And are they at the stage where they can actually get an organization to then take that knowledge and then get even better at reporting? Because it's the only way that you can really get the benefits out of the system is if you have an organization that are constantly driving excellence. So more reporting, better reporting. But, you always come from a starting point. And that starting point, it's important that you have a very clear direction that you want to improve the status quo.
Well, Mr. Rose, I appreciate you coming on. To the listeners out there, I'm going to recommend to you, go back, rewind this one, listen to it again. There's a lot of golden nuggets inside of there to listen to exactly what Mate 2.0 can do. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, you.
The views and opinions expressed during this broadcast, podcast, or radio show are solely those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Safety FM and or Radio Big. The content discussed, including examples of analysis, is provided for illustrative purposes only. It should not be applied as the sole solution in real-world scenarios, as it is based on limited and dated open source information. Any assumptions made during this broadcast, podcast, or radio show are not reflective of Safety FM and or Radio Big. No portion of this broadcast, podcast, or radio show may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of Safety FM and or Radio Big. For permission requests, please contact Safety FM or Radio Big directly.